And the conversation continues. I'm Michael Dismuke. I'm a freelance writer for Star Trek Adventures RPG, lead writer on Captain's Log, and a writer for Star Trek fiction, amongst other things. You can always check me out at michaeldismuke.com for more about the latest projects and events coming up. And of course, I've been co-hosting this show, continuing conversations with my partner in crime, in Universal Crime. I think we're Fenris Rangers at this point, Jim Johnson.
Hey everybody, Jim Johnson. I'm the project manager and line editor for the Star Trek Adventures RPG and the Captain's Log solo RPG, both published by Modiphius Entertainment, these 8+ years, now into the second edition of the Star Trek Adventures RPG. Also co-host on this show with Michael, 4 years strong, lots of episodes. I would plug my website, but it hasn't been updated in a day, so I don't think I want to send people to it just yet because I need to spend some time fixing it before I embarrass myself.
Your website is Modiphius.com. Click start.
No. That's not that's who I work for. That's not my personal brand.
All right.
I need to be like you and work on my personal brand in addition to Star Trek Adventures. So that will come in time. So until that point, I will wait. And anyway, so having lots of fun with the game. We still always got something new to talk about. And I think with the launch of the second edition, that gives us an opportunity to take a fresh spin on a bunch of the species that are included in the core book and give new fans an opportunity to think about those species that are in the book and go, oh, well, why should I play this species or that species? We do have a series of blog posts written by Rachel Cruz and Patrick Goodman that you can go check out about all the species that are in the second edition core book. But now we're supplementing that by doing these different continuing conversations when we have time and space in our schedule to talk how awesome all these different species are and do our traditional riff on them and just come up with all kinds of crazy, amazing ideas. So that's what we're going to do tonight. We're going to tackle the Trill tonight, which I'm super excited about. I love the Trill. So we have a very special guest with us. You saw BC last week and BC's back now. So yep. BC, introduce yourself and tell us all about what you're doing.
Sure. I'm BC Holmes. I'm the current maintainer of the Star Trek Character Creator app. I'm also a player and GM of Star Trek Adventures.
Yeah, including being the captain of the USS Challenger, Nella Zen, who happens to be the species we're discussing today. Trills.
Indeed.
Right?
Exactly.
So since you're the captain of it, why don't you, we'll go around and we'll talk about what we know about Trills for those who maybe are not super familiar. Maybe they've never seen a Trill in an episode before, or they've heard it, but not too sure. So what's your take on Trills, BC?
Sure. So I think this has evolved a couple of times in the course of the show. But the essence of the Trills is that the Trills are a humanoid species. They're distinctive from humans in that they have a series of dots that run, across their forehead and down their necks and over their shoulders. And the majority, other than the dots, the majority of the Trill are very much like humans, as to the extent that we know anything about them. However, one of the aspects of Trill society is that there is this second type of species on the planet, which they refer to as the slug or the symbiont. And these symbionts can be joined with the humanoid Trill. And when a Trill is joined to a symbiont, they get the memories of all of the previous people that the symbiont has been joined with, and they can use that as part of shaping their life experience, providing wisdom and knowledge beyond one lifetime of experience. It's sort of established this is something that is particularly desired amongst the Trill. The Trill society seems to be based around this idea that joining with the Trill is like this thing that a lot of people aspire to. But it's only a minority of people who have the opportunity to get themselves joined with the Trill.
Yes, good synopsis of our Jim. What do you want to add on that? What we know about the Trill?
Oh, I'll just add that the Trill were first introduced in the Next Generation episode, The Host, where it's been 40 years, so spoiler warnings, I guess, if you haven't watched it yet. The Trill character has gets along really well with Dr. Crusher, and then in a freak situation dies, and the host dies, but the symbiote's still alive. Riker is the temporary host until they can find a suitable replacement, and Riker's got got the symbiote, and he's all of a sudden got the symbiote still has feelings for Crusher, and it gets really awkward and weird, and then they all resolve it. But then in DS9, they brought the Trill forward into a major character, Jadzia Dax, and then later Ezri Dax. Again, spoiler warning. And obviously making a species a main character gives the writers and the players, in our case for RPGs, a huge opportunity to expand the world building, to do so much more with the Trill that you've ever seen before, and which was amazing. I mean, they did some great world building for the Trill in throughout DS9, and then with the later 3 seasons of Discovery, they introduced a Trill character. Actually, they introduced a human character who was hosting a symbiote, so that expanded the world building even further. And so it's just awesome. It's just awesome to see all this new stuff being added to Trill. I think Adira was a really neat character, Adira and Gray and Tal, and it was really nice that they made that touchstone back to DS9 and carried it forward into the 32nd century. So Trill, I don't talk about them a lot, but Trill are actually one of my favorite species, and I really want to play a game someday and play a Trill, because I think there's just so much potential there.
Well, for now, you can rub elbows with Commander Zen, and
Word.
That's good. So Commodore Zen. So, and I like it too. To your point about Discovery, what I thought was really cool is that they had the one episode wherein they were interacting with all their past lives. And so you got an idea to see what's going on in their head at any given time, which I thought was super cool. We hear about it. I do think that, most people I probably think would say Dax is their number, that Jadzia Dax is their favorite Trill so far, just because that character's kick butt. But I thought from a creative standpoint and science fiction standpoint, it was so refreshing to see such a cool character where you're constantly kind of like, wait, the worm's talking, or is this the humanoid talking, or the meld? Like what a complex character. And I like different types of life forms too. Like I don't, if everyone's human, humanoid, and this one was like so alien a concept. I'm like, yeah, that's what Star Trek should be. You should be really pushing the limits of that. Did canon ever resolve? Quick question. I don't know the answer to this, as to why the TNG Trills look different than the DS9 Trills. So the TNG Trills had the little head thing going on, and by the time they showed up in DS9, it ended up being dots. I know the off-canon reason, just so you all know, because I listen to Delta Flyers, and Terry Farrell is on there, and basically they didn't want to put her in makeup. She didn't want to be in makeup, and it was a design choice. But was there any kind of canon explanation for it, BC or Jim?
To my knowledge, there's never a canon explanation for it.
I don't think it may have been brought up in some of the novels, but I don't remember there being a canon other than just the transition from one series to the other series, and again realizing that you're making this a main character as opposed to a one-off guest star, and plus Terry Farrell being Terry Farrell didn't want the facial plants on her face for 6 seasons, right? Totally understandable, right? Who wants to sit? I mean, not. Let me rephrase. Not everybody wants to sit in a makeup chair for hours and hours and hours before the performance. Hats off to Rene Auberjonois and Quark. I just drew a blank on his name. Armin Shimmerman. Sorry, Armin
Shimmerman and Andy Peregrine. Andy for
Andy Robinson and
Andy Robinson,
Michael Dorn too, right? I mean, they have to deal with regular ongoing makeup. Anyway.
So the next question for this is, why play a Trill? VC, what are your opinions? Like, what kind of person might be attracted to playing a Trill?
So I think that if you're really into the role-playing aspect of the game, like if you really like to explore the boundaries of your character as opposed to, just being there for the pew-pew or what have you. Nothing wrong with being there for the pew-pew, but if you're really into exploring, the richness of your character and fleshing out the backstory, etc., Trill gives you just so much extra backstory to play with. Like you could, and you can evolve it organically throughout the course of play. I think that one of the things I was enjoying in the games that we were playing, the USS Challenger games, being joined gives you this cool talent, which allows you to say, hey, I want to, suddenly bring a skill, or sorry, a focus into this particular role or something like that. But at that mechanical level, like that's only part of the fun of that. Like you get to additionally say, okay, I have this skill because of this past life that was this person who did this thing, and immediately like my brain started to imagine like what was that other person like, etc. And how does that shape the current character, etc. And so that sort of stuff is just rich, fertile ground to role play against.
Yeah, Jim, what do you think?
Yeah, I was going to say much the same thing. I think as a writer, right, and a gamer, right, coming into a game and playing a Trill, it means I don't have to just make one character. I can make a whole bunch of characters, right? I can make all these different backstories. Like Jadzia, Dax. By the time Dax joined with Jadzia, there were 7 lifetimes prior to Jadzia. So that's an opportunity to play 7, or an opportunity to create 7 different characters, or at least the bare bones of 7 different characters, and combine them all into one. And then also as a historian, it's just a great opportunity wherever you are in the timeline, playing your game, you can reach back hundreds of years. Now, of course, you have to be careful, because there's a point where the Federation didn't know about the Trill and didn't know about the symbiotes and stuff. So it'd have to be a secret, which is really cool though, right? Because then your character could have a secret that the other players don't know about, but then could discover over the course of the campaign or something. But I love the idea, because like some species like the Vulcans are long lived, right? So you could play a generational kind of game where you're playing the same character from like original series to next gen. Like maybe you're playing through the Shackleton game, the Shackleton Expanse campaign, or you could play a Trill. You could play a Trill, an unjoined Trill in the original series, or maybe joined but secretly joined, like Commodore Zen is secretly joined, and then that host dies either in game or maybe just right amount, and then played their future host in a later era campaign, but you still have that connective tissue between the two. And I love that idea as a writer and as a game master. Like what kind of subplots and seeds and stuff can you pull into it? And I mean, honestly, a lot of it is built off of what they did with Dax, because they added so much cool stuff to her character and gave her so much more to do, just by virtue of the fact that they could easily plug in what her other hosts were doing, right? Like Curzon was big into the Klingons, so Dax is big into the Klingon, or Jadzia is big into the Klingons. And I mean, what a cool science fiction story this is. One of her previous hosts was a murderer, right? It's like, ooh, there's just so much stuff you can pull from that.
Yeah, and going back to just improv alone,
Yeah.
to me, I find the joint Trills, again, as we've seen with Jadzia, to be so empathetic and versatile because of that, less judging people on the outsides and really trying to figure out the inside. Like to your point with how Dax was so comfortable with the Klingons, and the Klingons accepted her. Like to me, it's like, oh, you even have to, like, if you're one of the NPCs or one of the fellow player characters, wrap your head around this now. You have to like wrap it in that this person is coming with a lot of experiences, different bodies, just so many different life experiences. And I think BC, we've played 2 games with you so far. With it, it's been great how you've done that. And I've seen others play also, and the improv opportunities of create yes and on the fly. The only species that I would say is comparable, and you could probably do the same with, would be Borg, who are recalling memories and abilities from previous species they absorbed. I could see similar, something like that. But to me, Trills are like the next level of improv, yes, and playing for everybody around, not just the person playing it, but for the people experiencing it with it. Oh, anything else on Trill?
Can I throw?
Please.
Well, so mostly we've been talking about joined Trill, but it's also possible to play unjoined Trill. And I think that raises an interesting question about like, how does an unjoined Trill feel about things? I don't know if you've ever played the video game Star Trek Resurgence, but there's a minor character in Star Trek Resurgence So in the Star Trek Resurgence, there's sort of like two storylines, and in one storyline you play the executive officer, and the other storyline you play one of the enlisted engineers who goes off and fixes things. And the enlisted engineer has like this buddy who's Trill, and she is established as being unjoined Trill. And there's like this one interesting conversation that the two of them have where she talks about how her sister was joined, and that, she was always told that, it doesn't fundamentally change who you are. You just get all of this additional wisdom and knowledge. But she says basically, no, after my sister was joined, she was nothing like my sister anymore. And I kind of really resent that. And it's such a revealing little moment that makes me wonder, okay, so what is it like to play an unjoined Trill? And how does the unjoined Trill feel about the joined and about Trill society and stuff like that? And I think there's a lot of fertile ground there as well.
Yeah. Are there ones that don't want to be joined? I know we've explored in Star Trek Deep Space Nine, those who wanted to be joined and somehow didn't pass the test to do so, that maybe they were bitter about that. But are there Trill that are just not interested in being joined for whatever reason?
Yeah, sure.
So we haven't seen very many of them. I think they established that like the Guardians and the Ks aren't joined, but they choose to spend all of their time, hanging out with symbionts in the murky waters, etc. So that's kind of interesting. But I also think that there's a thing that's interesting to me about Trill society is like there's a darker element of it. Like they're tremendously secretive. There's a couple of storylines in Deep Space Nine where we learn that they're actually kind of duplicitous. Like they withhold information from their people. They have a lot of taboos. Well, at least they have one major taboo that we're aware of. But so there is a sort of a bit more darker element of the Trill that I think that hasn't really been explored in as great of detail.
Jim, what were you going to say about being an unjoined Trill? Do you think there's people who just not interested?
Oh yeah, well, I was thinking by the 32nd century, I think they established that there there weren't enough symbionts, or no, there weren't enough. There weren't enough qualified hosts, right? And so their species was having some real bad issues because they didn't have enough bodies to put these symbiotes in, but at the same time they're also isolationist, and they were really, really upset that Adira, being a human, was hosting a Trill, and they're like, oh no, you can't do that. And then one faction was like, well, that could be the savior of our species, because now we could potentially join with non-Trill and continue the symbionts going forward. But what I was thinking about was what if you're like a Trill who scored really high on the tests, but adamantly refuses to want to be joined, right? And you're like, no, leave me alone. I don't want to join. I don't want to do it. And then all of a sudden, like, the important pressure is put on this character, like, not to say that they're the savior of the species or whatever, but like, we need you to join. Like, you are ideally matched to this symbiote, symbiote X or whatever, and that symbiote has really important information that we can't get out of them other than to join again, and you're refusing to do that. What does that mean?
Oh, that's so deep.
And then the Trill says, well, screw you guys, I'm gonna go join Starfleet and go on a 5-year mission way the heck away from Trill. Leave me alone.
I think you wrote the next USS Challenger episode.
Oh, nice. There you go.
But the fact that you said that they have a secret, and that there's this, again, going to be your part, the shadowy sides that's trying to get it out of them.
Mm-hmm.
And by merging them, that's a story that I've never seen.
I mean, not to get, well, I mean, we were riffing, right? So we can get dark, but like, what if there is a Trill who was forced to join, right? Like they, like taking the story further, this character says, Trill, I don't want to join. I'm leaving. I'm out of here. What if the Trill send their, secret security agents after them, apprehend them, bring them back to Trill, and then forcibly make them join? I mean, that obviously, get permission from your group.
That deals with a lot of subjects. That's really interesting.
Yeah.
Which
that'd be a fascinating character, though.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead. I had a slightly different interpretation of that episode in Discovery. Over the weekend, I watched a handful of the Trill episodes of the various shows, and so I was rewatching that episode in which Adira goes back to Trill to meet with the Trill leaders, and I think they're a little vague about precisely what the problem is, but they do say that their society has been decimated and they're in danger of collapse. And my interpretation of that was that so many of their symbionts were off world that they only had a small number of symbionts left.
Right.
And I think that my interpretation of this is that the symbionts are actually like the part of the society that holds society together. Like I think that there's an element of, aristocracy about the symbionts and the joined people. Like I think that if they lose a certain number of symbionts, they feel like they've lost a certain amount of collective memory of their society. And that's part of what, in my interpretation, leads to that collapse of their society. They're like, oh no, we've lost so many symbionts. Like our society doesn't remember how to function because they are the keepers of all of our social information and knowledge, et cetera. And if they're not here, then what do we do? And I think that, to go back to your darker scenario, like if you have a leading scientist who never wants to be joined because they're really into their research and just taking time to be an initiate for 5 years just seems like a waste of time. But Trill Society desperately wants to hold on to that scientific knowledge. And you have like one of these setups where you're like, okay, the elements of Trill Society is doing things here.
Mind-splitting riff about to go based off that. Imagine if this scientist is like a geneticist and has figured out a way to help the worms multiply, become stronger, and they don't want to share that knowledge. They're even the worms are like, wait, no, we need this knowledge. And that's the key. And he's trying to become, in a sense, part of the aristocracy by saying, no, elevate me to a higher position in Trill. And I don't want to be joined. I just want to use this knowledge. And that would be an amazing.
I had a different riff that was a little bit more positive. Again,
positive. No, just kidding.
I know. but cool, right? So like in the 32nd century, what if they're like if the Trill are aware that so many of the symbiotes were off planet and are lost to the ether. And because of the communications issues, they can't easily get back to Trill, right? They can't communicate with Trill. They can't get back to Trill. What if there was like a little recon team, a player character team of Trill, whether they're joined or unjoined, who take it upon themselves or are commissioned to go explore the galaxy, tracking down Trill to start regaining some of that lost knowledge and recovering either symbiotes or like their artifacts or whatever, or recordings, personal logs, etc., just to try to start getting back what they lost. Right, that'd be like an ongoing quest kind of a storyline that doesn't have anything to do with Starfleet necessarily, although it certainly could interweave along with that. But kind of like Trill archaeologists going out into the galaxy to recover their lost knowledge would be kind of cool.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of like trying to recover the Jewish art that was lost in World War II. Like, as a premise like that, and that trying to seeing it in museums and stuff. So you start finding these Trills and trying to encourage them to come back. Why would the Trill not want to come back? Those that are out there, like, why would it not be kind of just a natural, innate desire to go back to Trill? Why would people choose to? Because if you go out there and you can't transfer the symbiote, then both die. Both the body and a long-lived Trill. Some of these are 800 years old, 300, 600, 700 years old. Why would a Trill not want to go back and pass on and get a new host? I would need a big motivation for that to understand that. Everyone's thinking, you don't know at home.
Well, I mean, if you buy into this idea that there are sketchy elements of Trill society, and that part of the sketchiness involves the fact that these Trill have this over magnified role in their society, then I could see some joined Trill saying, we need to undermine that sort of setup here. We need to change that. And that's not going to happen so long as the joined Trill are all part of the system. And so a good way to undermine that is to opt out of that system and say, okay, we're not going to participate in this joining ceremony any further.
And so they're basically saying I'm willing to die and make
Yeah.
this my last host. Oh,
I'm going to die for a cause, and this is one of those causes where I get to die of old age easily.
Yeah. Maybe they say Trill society is broken. I don't want any more part of it. I'm going to take whatever institutional knowledge I have and just take it away. Take it away from the culture. Take it away from society, and I'm just going to go live out the rest of my natural life somewhere far removed. And that could result in maybe the Trill going to hunt them down, right, and saying, no, we want that institutional knowledge back.
for that motivation to work for me, though, there'd have to be such a heinous crime that the Trill aristocrat, we'll call them the Trill aristocrats, there would have to been some sort of such a heinous crime to convince me as a watcher that some Trills are like, we'll end our life now instead of passing on this heritage. And I don't think I can't even come up with what that would be. I don't even want to discuss it, because it would have to be so heinous that I need a player safety checklist before launching into why I'm willing to die for my cause.
Yeah, makes sense.
Right. It has to be sure. Yeah.
So one of the thoughts I had prior to starting this session had to do with a particular theory of wealth. I think it from Ruby Payne's book on a framework for understanding poverty. I will say that I think that this theory has been criticized, and so one of the most quotable elements of that book talks about, if you look at three strata of wealth: poverty, middle class, and wealth, upper class. Each of those strata has very different relationships to time. So the lower class has a fixation on right now because the lower class needs to deal with what are today's problems. Let's solve today's problems. The middle class is very fixated on the future. What if I do the right thing? If I work hard, what will I become? What will I manage to earn? What will my children have, et cetera? Whereas the upper class are very fixated on history and tradition, et cetera. And that's part of why I sort of draw this parallel between the aristocracy and the Joy and Trill, because they have this sort of fascination with the history and with carrying on these traditions. But if you amplify that particular idea, you could imagine like the Trill are like the billionaire class of the Joy and Trill are the billionaire class of Trill society. And that could carry with it like all of the things that we're seeing in today's society, where the billionaire class is like running the world and making choices about, who gets to be the politician of the moment, et cetera. And for me, like that's not heinous. I mean, it's not quite heinous in the way I think that you're talking about, but I think there's a lot of fraught material that you could explore there. And it's material we haven't seen because we've always been seeing things through the eyes of the Joy and Trill.
Well, you've actually given a good motivation now for me, because based on that, like the corruption that exists within that oligarchy through society, there are individuals who say, you know what, I'm giving up my wealth in order to be a better person, not to be part of the system. We've seen that happen historically. So that would be a really safe player way to introduce it. People may want to take it other way, but now you've given it. So, okay, now I can have a motivation. And that would be fun exploring that in a game. It's like, well, what crimes do you know of? And people would want to hear that, that, right? In fact, it could even lead to enough evidence that the Federation has to get involved. Like, wait a second, you hit all of these human rights issues, or not human, but humanoid rights issues. It's your legacy, and we let you into the Federation. That would be fascinating. Oh, okay, now you got me. There we go. Got to talk it out with fellow writers. See, you always come up with that. Fantastic. Anything else about Trills that again people may want to play and explore, and why they're so popular?
So one of the things I mentioned to you in email is that it's hard for me to think about the Trill without seeing them as a very clear queer metaphor. For me, a crucial element of the Trill has always been the fact that their storylines have often had a queer sensibility to them, even from the very first episode, The Host. The Host story very much resembles a transition story. right to the point where, you have, especially a trans transition story from like the 90s, 80s and 90s, where you have this adult whose body changes, trying to maintain existing relationship with Dr. Crusher, and then it reaches a point where the body changes enough and that relationship doesn't seem like it can continue onward. Like there's just so, to me, this is so clearly a trans metaphor that, I have difficulty seeing it any other way. And it has been interesting to me that the Trill have often been at the center of a lot of the a lot of the queer representation in Trek. So Rejoined, being the famous episode from Deep Space Nine, was the the next big Trek foray into queer representation. Although it's a queer representation, that's a very special episode sort of representation. And then the fact that both Adira Tall, who's non-binary, and Grey Tall, who's trans, are the Trill and joined characters of Discovery. Like that just again reinforces this association for me between the Trill and the LGBTQ community.
Yeah, and that's good. Again, another thing to consider too. If people are playing a character, know your group. What issues are you going to explore? Pull out that checklist, right? Because that again, Terry Farrell made a point that I think when she originally started playing the character, she had no idea how it was going to resonate, and it resonated, to your point, BC, within that community like that. So bring that to the table. Be sensitive to who you're playing with. Be very, these are things to talk out, because probably I would say Trills are probably the most socially provocative character that came out of the 90s carrying into now, where I hear more discussions about that issue more than any other character. Wouldn't you say?
Indeed. And can I just throw out one more idea that comes from that? And that is what was this guy's name? I wrote it down. Goffman. So there's a guy named Goffman who in the 60s talked about what he referred to as spoiled identity, and what he was referring to basically as marginalized identity. And he's talking about some of the elements of various marginalized identities. I just lost my my headphone.
We're listening still.
There it is. So one of the things he was talking about with regards to marginalized identity is that there are two different types of marginalized identity in his mind. Like there's marginalized identity that you can keep secret, like queerness, and marginalized identity that you can't keep secret, like race, for example. And some of the coping strategies that exist between those two groups are very different. Marginalized identities that are visible, coping strategies often involve things like humor to diffuse situations, etc. Marginalized identities that you can keep secret often involve coping strategies such as information control. Is it interesting to us that the Trill society seems to be one that really embraces information control? Like they're really secretive. They're really interested in controlling access to information amongst its citizens, etc. Like the resonances here just like really fascinate me.
Yeah.
And become really interesting.
We often encourage people. The reason Star Trek is so important as an artistic medium too is because how you can use science fiction to touch on social issues and heighten sensitivity and awareness too, right? Which is brilliant. And I love those kind of unexpected outcomes. So again, making the Trills probably one of the most complex, fascinating characters to play. You can go so many directions with them, which is really exciting. Jim, what do you think?
No, I think I'm just sitting here nodding and agreeing 100% with all this, and I don't have anything to add. But it just absolutely, there's just so much depth that you can put into them. And as a game master, I really love doing the yes and giving my players challenges, especially when there's a Trill, because it's an opportunity for that Trill that Trill player to lean into their abilities and like just come up with a solution that maybe I didn't think of. It's like, well, you got X number of lived experiences. Draw back on any of your. It reminds me a little bit of that episode that you ran for us, Michael, where you were trying to gently remind us to keep looking at the traits, right? Look at the traits. How are you going to use the traits? How are you going to use the traits? How are you going to use your character? And it's like, this is a way for a game master to gently nudge the Trill player. Don't forget, you are a Trill, or assuming you're joined, right? Assuming you're joined, you've got this built-in support structure. If you need a focus or you need something, lean into your character, right? It's just
It's even if you even if you need an opposing viewpoint in a good way. And what I mean by that is if we go back now to Jadzia Dax and with everything we've said so far, she loved Klingons. She loved Ferengi. When other people were dogging up Ferengi, she was like, no, I got this. You know, like those life experiences and the diversity made her such a better person and such a negotiator and such a diplomat and such an intellect because of her own, I think, experience of seven lives, right? She had different seven lives. I
something
think
like that, yeah.
she was her seventh
I think
life.
Ezra was the eighth, yeah.
Right. So I think anybody who's playing that character, you have an opportunity when all of a sudden a Gorn shows up and everyone is freaking out that no, maybe one of your past lives had a best friend who was a Gorn.
Mm.
And all of a sudden you have to be like, you are all biased and y'all need to chill for a little bit. And that's such a fun character to play. So BC, as you play Commodore Zen, I'm going to be testing you on these in future Challenger games because as we talk it out, I'm like, oh, this you can really put some really good stories together.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, beautiful. Anything more about Trills? One last go around. Let's go, Jim, BC.
Anything more? Gosh, I think there's so much potential there. So don't be afraid to jump into it and have fun with it. Now, fortunately, the Trill are pretty well developed by virtue of DS9 and Discovery to some extent, but there's still room to play. I mean, even we were just riffing on what's the society like and what secrets are there that we haven't discovered yet. I think there's a lot of room there to play with. So yeah, I'd say give it a try something different.
Yeah, and we've only seen them in two eras majorly. With TNG era and 32nd Century, right? Mm-hmm. Oh, a little and Discovery, but that's future. Yeah. So that's all we've seen them is TNG and Discovery. But again, you can put them in different eras when they weren't popular. Maybe they were early in Enterprise too, and no one knew about it. So you could have some fun. It doesn't take too much makeup to cover spots. So, BC. Final say about Trill.
Well, I think Michael Burnham does say at one point in at the time they got the 32nd Century, she says we knew about the Trill, we just hadn't heard about the symbionts at that point.
Correct.
So there must be Trill wandering around in the TOS era, commanding the USS Challenger, for example.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Good point. All right, good. Again, fascinating. There's so many ins and outs on different characters to play. If all of you want to see someone playing a Trill in fantastic form, tune into the USS Challenger episodes on continuing missions, continuing conversations when BC plays Commodore Zen, and we will have some coming back in the future. And you have seeded many interesting plots for me. I'm going to see how I can get as many of these ideas into our next game because I'm really excited about it. So thank you. Gratitude to, because I listen to Delta Flyers a lot. I really gratitude to Terry Farrell for providing so many insights about the character and what it took to act that character. I think it's wonderful that she does a weekly show where she goes into the depth on how that character affected her. I mean, and we were watching, just give you an example, Deep Space Nine last night, me and my wife, and my wife was like, "You're saying this was her first acting job?" And I'm like, "Yeah, this was her first acting job." And so Terry hit the mark. She was a model before she did it, but this was her first, TV acting job. And so what a blessing that had Terry Farrell play that character and to bring Trills alive for us. So that's who my thank you goes to. BC, yours, and Jim will close us out.
You used the same one I was going to use. So since you've already sent gratitude to Terry Farrell, maybe I'll send gratitude to Nicole DeBoer, who was playing the next iteration of the Dax symbiont and was obviously different despite carrying the same symbiont and retaining many of the same memories. So Nicole,
good one. Good
gratitude to you.
Fantastic. Take us out, Jim.
So I mean, I'll also say gratitude to all the other actors who played Trill over the years, but also want to thank all the writers who actually originated. I'd have to go back and remember who wrote the host. I don't remember, and who originated the Trill, and then of course Berman and Pillar and everybody else on DS9's writing staff who added so much depth to Jadzia and then Ezri, and then of course the actors, who realized that and added their own depth to it as well. So you've given us so much fertile tools to play with. So gratitude for that. And then of course I didn't mention it last week, but this week I also want to mention all the fans. Thank you so much, fans of Star Trek Adventures, Captain's Log, Star Trek Adventures Second Edition, etc. You're keeping the game alive. You are expanding the game, grassroots, player by player, as new players come in. You're helping them out. You're giving them opportunities to learn about the game. You're pointing them into BC's awesome character builder app. You're telling them about the game. You're getting them involved. And you're growing the fan base, which is awesome. I can't thank you all enough. This game is alive by virtue of the fans. So thank you all.
All right, BC, thanks for coming again. We always enjoy having you.
Always appreciate you.
Thanks for having me.
Till next time.
Back real soon.
Yep. IDIC.
Live long and prosper. Be safe. Be well. We'll talk to you next time.